Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to NewsDose, and Nintendo appears to be fixing the Switch 2's biggest problem, being those pesky game key cards. Now, I do believe that this is going to take some time. This is not going to happen immediately. But there are a couple signals that indicates that this will be fixed sometime in the future. Of course, there's a survey going around, and a lot of people are talking about this right now. You may have already, but there's actually a little bit more to this story, so do make sure to stay tuned for all of that, as well as a big Xbox PlayStation game that could be on the way. This is really just kind of the new norm by this point. I don't think it's even surprising anymore, but it is still big news nonetheless, and we will get into all of that today. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, starting off with Rare's 40th anniversary. This is one of my all-time favorite studios, as they really made a big impact on my childhood. While they're not technically the same studio that they used to be, they've still made some of my all-time favorite games, whether that be Banjo-Kazooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, Diddy Kong Racing, and the list just goes on and on and on. This is a truly special studio, and the fact that they've made it to 40 years in an era when a lot of studios are shutting down really, I'd say, speaks volumes to their history and to their adaptability. Now, if you do want to celebrate their anniversary with some new stuff, though, there appears to be a 40th anniversary 8-bit Do controller on the way. Now, I'd like to see Xbox do one as well, considering their design team really has always excelled at making controllers. But for the time being, 8-bit Do is easily one of the best third-party controller options out there. Now, they also announced a Rare Collection for Evercade. This includes 12 games, and the title itself is actually Rare Collection 1, so this could indicate another collection could be on the way in the future, but for the time being, you'll get a physical copy of 12 of their games, including Battletoads, Conker's Pocket Tales, Jetpack, Saber Wolf, and the list goes on. I'll go ahead and include a picture on screen so you can see all of the different games included, but either which way, that's a pretty cool way to celebrate. And then on Xbox, they do have a new dynamic theme available if you want to check that out, but yeah. Big congrats to Rare and all of us longtime fans out there. Here's to another decade with, hopefully a new Banjo-Kazooie somewhere in that timeline. Now, speaking of collections, the Mortal Kombat Collection got its official release date. It'll be out later this year on December 12th, and this includes a lot of different games. Mortal Kombat 1, 2, 3, and 4, Mortal Kombat Advance, Tournament Edition, Deadly Alliance, and even the Mortal Kombat Trilogy. So if you are a big fan of this series, then this looks like it could be a must-have collection, especially given that it's getting an actual physical release. In fact, even the Switch 2 will get a true physical version that actually has everything included on the cartridge for a change. However, with a twist, because the Switch 2 edition is priced a bit higher than the other versions that are available. Unlike the Switch 1, Xbox, and PlayStation versions, which will all be going for $50, the Switch 2 edition will be $60. Though honestly, I think a lot of Switch 2 owners will probably prefer this option, just because otherwise they would probably get a game key card because, Switch 2 cartridges are expensive for third-party companies. So this is more or less the trade-off of having a true physical version for the Switch 2. It's going to be a bit more expensive, or at least for now. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a bit. Before we get into all of that, though, we had a THQ showcase late last week, which actually revealed quite a bit. So let's just go over some of its highlights. The SpongeBob Titans of Tides leak was in fact legitimate. It's now official, and it will be out on November 18th. This is a part of the 3D platforming series by Purple Lamp, which I firmly believe that their games are a bit underrated. Their SpongeBob games are surprisingly very good collectathon 3D platformers, and the fact that the new entry is going for just $40, brand new, I think that's great to see. Now, Recreation also got another gameplay reveal, and this looks like Burnout. Yes, there is a creation element to this game, which will help differentiate it. It could add a little bit more longevity to it, but if you like Burnout, then this one will probably be a fun one to pick up. In fact, I just like that we're getting a new arcade-like racer. It feels like we don't really get as much of those anymore in the modern era, so it's nice to see a game like Recreation. And speaking of games that just looks good, the internal life of Goldman continues to be very impressive. We've already seen this game a few times, and I mean, every single time that we do, I always walk away thinking that, yeah, this could end up being a surprise hit when it eventually releases. It's a Metroidvania-like game, and it just has a beautiful art style to it. I really like the way this one looks. Hey, if anything else, if it plays as good as it looks, then we could be in for a real treat. The Gothic 1 remake also got a release window. It's now slated for early 2026. But hey, for you Gothic fans out there, if the remake isn't doing it for you, well, they've also decided to re-release the entire classic trilogy in early 2026 as well. So there you go. Reanimal also is slated for early 2026. This is their new horror game that looks oddly similar to the Little Nightmare series. So if you like those games, maybe keep an eye on Reanimal's launch for Q1 of 2026. And then lastly, their big announcement was for Darksiders 4. Now, I know there's some big fans of this franchise dating all the way back to the Xbox 360 days. However, for the time being, we really don't have a ton of information to go by. It'll unite the Four Horsemen, but other than that, we don't really have any gameplay or even a release date. Just a simple confirmation. But hey, you know, that can still be exciting in its own right. Okay, so let's go and talk about what's happening with Nintendo and those hated Switch 2 game key cards, because Nintendo has been sending a survey to fans to get their feedback on what they think about them. They asked various different questions about whether you'll buy a game key card compared to if there were a true physical game with the data on the cartridge. I know, you know, here we are, and we don't really own anything. Whatever the case may be, they actually did this in Japan as well. I believe it was last month, and I think the reason that they're doing this is quite clear. They've received a ton of backlash over this decision, not only from unhappy fans, but also from investors, which they're even more likely to listen to than us. Last month, an investor asked them if they had a plan to fix this problem, because it seems to be pretty clear that fans don't like them, and, you know, importantly for investors, they've heard that they're not exactly selling very well either. So investors are right now applying some pressure to Nintendo, and I want to point that out because I have seen some takes online that this survey means apparently absolutely nothing. That's the claim going around. I completely disagree with that, though. Yes, surveys at times don't really amount to much of anything. I agree with that part, but for starters, these are very specific questions to ask your fans about. This doesn't seem to be some random thing that came out of nowhere. So I don't think that they're asking them for no reason at all. And in fact, this is where the story starts to get really interesting. It's now been discovered that the Switch 2 cart manufacturer, Macronix, revealed that they will be using MLC NAND and 3D NAND to produce cartridges depending on capacity requirements. So, in other words, what this means is that there are seemingly more cartridge sizes on the way. And for those that aren't aware, this is the main problem for the Switch 2. Right now, they only have a 64GB option, which is expensive for third-party developers. I believe it's upwards of $15 a cart. So, yeah, that eats into their profits. And that's why most third-party developers are opting for the much cheaper game keycard. Otherwise, like we're seeing with the Mortal Kombat Kollection as one such example, the Switch 2 version will just flat out be more expensive. So third-party companies are being put into this kind of weird predicament where they have to choose more expensive versus an option that fans just really don't like. And this is completely Nintendo's fault. Like, even now, I've seen people online make the excuse that, oh, well, this is normal for a launch console. They just don't have everything ready. Be patient. But that is ridiculous, in my opinion, just considering they literally just came off their longest life cycle of all time. They had 8 years to get the launch for the Switch 2 right. So this to me is inexcusable because Nintendo should have absolutely been prepared. They should have had more options at launch, including a 32GB option, a 16GB option, and even 8 if possible. Yes, I believe their plan for a while has been to eventually include those options, but I also don't think that they expected game key cards to necessarily blow up in their face the way that it has. What I believe is that they thought that they could simply force it onto consumers and that they just wouldn't care that much, and third parties would love them for it. However, Nintendo fans specifically, much more than Xbox and PlayStation fans, do prefer their physical media, and hopefully this fix comes sooner rather than later. I mean, if anything else, all the signs are there. We are going to get a fix. It's just a matter of when rather than if. Is this going to be hopefully by the next year, or is it going to be even longer than that? Now, one last thing before we go, because we are hearing about another major Xbox game for the PlayStation 5 being none other than Starfield. Yeah, this one comes from MP First, and they claim that it's targeting a spring of 2026 release to coincide with the second expansion. Allegedly, they held off from 2025 partially because Shattered Space wasn't nearly as well received as Microsoft wanted it to be. Seemingly, it didn't exactly meet their expectations, but they're hoping things will be different with the second expansion, which will now include the PlayStation 5 as well if all of this turns out to be true. Now, if it does, there are a couple things that are somewhat amusing about this situation. I mean, I don't really think this news comes off as a big surprise given Xbox's success on the PlayStation 5. They were, in fact, the #1 publisher on PlayStation last quarter. So, big or small, more games will absolutely come at some point. And Starfield seems like a likely candidate. But if it does, I'm very interested to see if it finds success on PlayStation, partially because I still believe that there's not a single game that has had a more bizarre launch than Starfield. I mean, there was so much just mind-numbingly ridiculous discourse around its launch. People were going crazy over the just simplest things like its menu, which was just so dumb. And a lot of that discourse, of course, came from people that weren't even going to play it in the first place. You know, people that were on a PlayStation console. I mean, after they celebrated rumors that it was going to be exclusive for the PlayStation 5, they quickly turned around and just tried to destroy this game just in the most bizarre possible ways. You know, they acted like it was going to be the worst game ever for this reason or for that reason. So if it comes out and it finds success on PlayStation, that will be quite the turnaround yet again. What I will say, though, is that if you haven't played Starfield and if you like Bethesda RPGs, give it a try. Personally, I don't think it's as good as Fallout or The Elder Scrolls. I do prefer those games, but I still think that Starfield is a good, solid experience. I gave it an 8 out of 10 myself. So on one side, it's not the game of the generation as Xbox fans claimed. Xbox fans are not innocent either, nor is it complete trash as PlayStation fans claimed. It's really just a good, solid game. Nothing more, nothing less, and I do think that it's worth playing. So if it comes to PlayStation, if you like Bethesda RPGs, give it a try. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.